Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CBI at 10. I'm delighted this morning we're joined by Lucy Winskill, who is the Pro Vice Chancellor at Northumbria University. Lucy, thank you very much for joining us. And in a moment, we're going to be joined by Emran Mian, who is, there are good titles in government, but this one is hard to beat. He's the DG of Decentralization, Growth, and best of all, Stronger Places. And Stronger Places is going to be the sort of subject and theme of our conversation this morning. We're going to try and get into levelling up and what in practical terms that means. But it's really good to see Tony Danker, the Director General of the CBI. Tony, good morning. But
Morning.
Before we get into levelling up, I hope that the crew on the call knows by now the nature of the CBI at 10. It's really an attempt to exchange information. So if people have got thoughts and views and questions, do share them. I'll try and weave them in. And whatever the point is, I know the CBI sort of keeps a note of all of these points, so we'll make sure that your thoughts are addressed and responded to. Tony, before Emran joins us, can we just do sort of 5-10 minutes or so on a couple of broader themes? One is what you're seeing overall in the economy, what the forecast now looks like for economic growth, and some of the questions you're hearing about labour supply shortages and worries around inflation.
Yeah, thanks, James. It's great to be with everybody, and welcome, Lucy. The CBI on Friday brought out our economic forecast. As you know, we publish these quarterly, and in our previous forecast, we thought the economy would return to pre-COVID levels at the end of 2022 or thereabouts, close to. We've now revised that to say it will come back to pre-COVID levels at the end of 2021, this year. So a hugely optimistic statement about the state of the economy. I've just wrote down a few key stats. GDP growth of 8.2% expected this year, 6.1% in 2022, which is a really big number. We all knew there'd be a bounce back this year. That's a big number for next year. Unemployment peaked lower than expected. So we're thinking 5.5% in Q3. Household spending set to increase by 6% in 2021 and 7% in 2022. Welcome, Emran. Lovely to see you here. So really strong economic forecast. And I think, you talk, look, I'm very lucky. I probably speak to 100 businesses a week in every sector. And of course, if you speak to hospitality sector, event sector, aviation sector, there is no good news, right? And we'll come on to that, I'm sure. It's just incredibly hard. But when you speak to the rest of the sectors, I think there is, Andy Haldane likes to talk about pent-up demand and the coiled spring of consumer spending. I think it's true in business-to-business work overall. Unless you're in a sector specifically hit by COVID, then the outlook is very strong for recovery. Now, not quite at pre-COVID levels of business investment, and that, as you know, is the metric we care most about, because we think that actually that's the thing that needs to power the recovery once all the consumer spending and government spending of the next 18 months goes away. So still nervous about business investment, but overall a really good economic outlook, as you say.
And what about these two twin worries? We'll cover the sectoral point in a moment, Tony. The twin worries about labour supply shortages and inflation pressures.
Yeah, look, the labour supply shortages is the thing that members are talking to me about most of all in the last couple of weeks. And it's true in lots of different sectors. I'm speaking to a large food producer who just can't get any butchers in this country. We know the hospitality sector is struggling to hire chefs, but actually across the piece, construction, everywhere, there are labour shortages. Now, the real question is what's driving them? And what do we do about them? Or is this temporary? Is this cyclical? And there are a range of drivers for this, and you can hear those in the anecdotes. So those might be, the furlough is artificially keeping the labor market in a certain place. It may well people have exited sectors. Like, I used to work in hospitality, but it's just unstable. I'm going to find work somewhere else. There's quite a lot of evidence that says people have gone home outside the UK, probably because of the pandemic, and look likely not to return because of Brexit. And it's important that we get underneath exactly what the drivers are, the nature and scale of these drivers. And so I'd like to say to anybody on the call, what we are doing at the moment is we are gathering genuine corporate case studies about labour shortages and any evidence we can about what's driving them. I have a strong hypothesis at the moment that we've got an immigration question coming to mind around certain areas of skill shortages. But I think it's probably too early to say that with any definitive data. And so I think this question of labor shortages is probably, with the exception of reopening the economy, is probably the dominant issue on people's minds. Now, it's related, James, to inflation, because the two drivers of inflation at the moment, one is, well, there's two or three really. One is unit costs going up across the world of all kinds of stuff and raw materials. The second is transportation and logistics cost, which definitely has an air of Brexit to it, but it's not only Brexit. You know, carrying cargo when planes aren't flying travelers on holiday is expensive. So there's definitely transportation costs. And I think the other thing is this wage shortages is going to drive wage inflation. So look, we're always in danger when we talk about inflation of talking ourselves into a problem. So I refuse to do that. I'm not going to make any predictions about inflation. And some forecasters, I think that it would be temporary if it happens. But I think the real drivers are there. You see it talking to every business. You see definitely the unit cost stuff, definitely input cost stuff, definitely transportation. And we're only really close to, I think, the implications of labor shortages, which will be pressure upwards on wages.
And Tony, then let's touch on this question about travel. I think people are largely wearing, businesses kind of understand the logic of the delay to the June 21st opening up, even though there's some frustration at it, mostly wearing it. Where you feel as though there is real confusion, and that's being generous about it, is around international travel. So what are you hearing on that?
Yeah, look, I think the real concern of the business community is that at the beginning, the government, and poor Emran is here from the government, but this is not his field of expertise. So Emran, you don't have to feel compelled to answer that, to justify every judgment of the SAGE committee. But, the government took this decision to have a risk-based approach, and we had red, amber, green. And the idea of amber was, we all know what that means, and it means you just have to quarantine. And so that's your choice. But of course, now the guidance is don't travel if it's amber. So amber sounds a bit like red. So I think there's quite a lot of uncertainty. Next Monday, I believe, the government's going to publish a framework for how it allocates risk-based factors to put people in red, amber, and green. And that's really important because it's the transparency of those factors that allow businesses to make judgments. So that's the first thing to say about travel. So yes, I think we're all a bit confused now about the government's true intent and what the red, amber, green system really means. On Friday, we should get the latest update to the list. And then hopefully early next week, we'll hear a bit more about the framework. The second thing to keep an eye on is business travel. But, everybody will focus on holidays at the moment for obvious reasons. Business travel is critical. And it's not just critical so I can fly to New York for a meeting. There's a lot of contracts. Even manufacturers will have contracts they need to service. Business travel is part of everyday business life. It's not just about, people on the red eye from New York. And then, look, the third thing I just wanted to say about this in general is I think we are now making a step change in the way we work with COVID, which is to live with the virus. And so once you want to live with the virus, then I think that has to apply to international travel. We need a system that gets to yes, not gets to no. And I think at the moment, the government seems to be weighted on getting to no when it comes to international travel. And we understand the concerns about importing variants. But of course, we exported the first variant. You can grow variants in your own country. And so this idea of getting to yes on living with the virus, and that will mean all kinds of mitigations, vaccine passports, etc. That's fine. But I would just urge the government when it comes to international travel to switch from getting to no to getting to yes. Everybody understands there are mitigations against that. But at the moment, I think we're just a bit confused.
Okay, Tony, thank you. I hope maybe next week, actually, because when we get together and have this Monday call CBI at 10, we'll have had both of those things by then, both the Friday list and Monday. We may be able to think a bit more about travel, and particularly in the context of competitiveness with Europe, where does seem to be more trouble in Europe. But let's get to the heart of today's conversation. Emran, thank you for joining us. I did disclose, I think, while you're trying to get on, that I've got massive title envy, because I love the title that you've got as Director General of Decentralization Growth and Stronger Places, that in particular. And this focus today is on that. I wonder, Tony, whether you could just start though by just talking about the seize the moment process and a bit about your thinking on regional competitiveness.
Sure. So we, as everybody knows, you've heard me talk about it a million times, we've spent the last 6 months trying to work out an economic strategy for the next 10 years for the country. And it's one to complement the government strategy. Government very good on macro, less good for obvious reasons on microeconomy and business sector growth. And we came up with 6 themes, as you know. They were decarbonisation, innovation, global trade, levelling up, inclusion and skills, and a healthier nation. And levelling up, I think, is one of those. It's one of those classic themes where we really need a business complement to government policy. And I discussed this with the Prime Minister directly, which is to date, and Emran will know this given what his department will do, and Lucy will certainly know it given the role she plays in the lab. To date, a lot of the government strategy for levelling up has been either macroeconomic or more likely it's been about government expenditure. It's about the money we spend on trains and infrastructure and where. And I think what we feel at the CBI is that stuff is necessary, but not sufficient. What levelling up has to mean is better jobs, better wages, high growth sectors, new skills and opportunity, which can only be delivered by businesses. And so there has to be a business story to levelling up, because in the end, it's businesses that give the jobs, that give the regeneration of a place. Now, where we are at the CBI is thinking, what is it that we can do to really help government get this right? And so we can come back to this in the discussion. The thing we've said that we really want to do is to play a role in understanding how business clusters work. We've never really taken this that seriously as a country. You know, other countries do this better. Silicon Valley famously in the US, and the Massachusetts Health Corridor. Germany, they do it really quite well. They think about manufacturing in Bavaria and so on. And in the UK, we have pockets of opportunity. But what we've never really done is turn those pockets into genuine world-class clusters that in turn transform a place. And we have the making of them, right? Lucy's from a place in the Northeast which has really got this huge unique advantage around renewable energy that's really ready there to be grabbed if we can grab it. There are others, you know, the Southwest does aerospace, Edinburgh does financial services, the Northwest is thinking about tidal power. Emran could give you the list. And what we at the CBI want to do is to work out, how do you transform those places from high potential to genuinely world-class employment generating, productivity generating clusters of success. And in fact, I'm off to the Northeast tonight to do a little bit of scoping around Lucy's part of town. And that's where I think we want to go. That's where I think business can really make the difference to the economics of a place.
Tony, thanks. Emma, I'm coming to you in one moment, but Lucy, I wonder whether or not you can sort of give us some sense of how realistic that is within the context of the Northeast. You know, you're chair of the Local Enterprise Partnership Board for the Northeast. Does what Tony says ring true? Is there a kind of argument for the Northeast that is around this idea of regional competitiveness and clustering, or do you have to serve everyone?
Absolutely, absolutely, James. Everything that Tony has said has resonated really strongly with me. I think there's two ways of looking at levelling up, and we all ask ourselves, what does it mean? If I start with the lens of what does it mean in addressing economic disparities, yes, we have one or two issues in the Northeast, and of course the major one is we have a higher level of unemployment, but we are closing the gap quicker to where we were before COVID and so on. But to balance that, we have the enormous strengths that Tony has just talked about. And for me, I think levelling up is us in the Northeast articulating the message clearly to government about those regional strengths. So you've talked about energy. Digital is one of the fast-moving areas in the Northeast. So energy, digital, automotive, of course, advanced manufacturing. So that really understanding from the regions where the strengths are, and we being an asset for UK PLC, to me is key to the levelling up agenda. We'll maybe turn to levelling up and what it means for an individual, social mobility and so on, because I think that's a lens as well that we need to understand and address, equally important. But yeah, everything that Tony has described is right. And in the Northeast, we've got a really strong record of attracting inward investment. Of course, the obvious example is a 30-year-old story now. I'm old enough to remember when Nissan first started scouting around, going, where in Europe would it come? And I'm old enough to have been part of the meet and greet delegation all those years back when I think I was in charge of the wives with a translator, because that's the way it worked those days. I wasn't doing anything more grown up than that. The world has changed. But if you look at how that has started, the growth of Nissan in the Northeast and the supply chain around it, those are the sorts of stories, and that takes long-term investment. It's not a quick policy that can change quickly. These areas of growth take long-term investment, support, but it's investment, not handout. It's understanding strengths.
And Lucy, could I understand, you've presumably been a student of some of these clusters that exist in other countries, understanding how it is that, I don't know, Tony says either it's Silicon Valley on tech, or the Mittelstand in Germany on manufacturing, or Osaka on, in Japan in terms of value-added manufacturing. The two elements of it that have always seemed to me to be confusing. One is, how do they get the arguments within the region sorted out? Because we misunderstand the extent to which there's competitiveness within regions. And how do you get the arguments within a country sorted out, so that if the Northeast wants to say we're going to be about renewables, digital and automotive, another part of the country doesn't pop up and say, yes, so are we. How do those things get resolved?
Well, first of all, if you've got another, first of all, not very long ago, I was welcoming a delegation from Germany because they were interested in how we had built up the sector around Nissan, automotive, and so on. So there are examples when they look to us to see how we have really done it in the region. I don't think we have to be competitive with one another. For me, the key is always get the inward investment to the UK, then work out where the strengths are. And there may be areas in the Northeast, for example, that could equally well cooperate with the Southwest, the Southeast, wherever it may be. So it's understanding those opportunities and also having the skills to work collaboratively in partnership. And I think if COVID-19 has taught us anything, particularly in the Northeast, we were a good partnership builders anyway. We have really pulled together. So any parochialism, any localism has disappeared as we've realized we've absolutely got to grow with one another and support one another. So I never see it as a sort of regional battle with others. It's recognizing the strengths and building. Businesses play a key part in that. Of course, I'm going to say this with my day job on as Pro Vice Chancellor of Northumbria University. Universities are key to building those sectors because we develop the skills, we help develop the R&D, not just producing the graduates, but degree apprenticeships, lifelong learning, skilling up adults, and so on. All that part of the story is, it's the bigger picture.
Lucy, thank you. Emma and Mian, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I think that there's often a conversation around levelling up, which is what it is. I think actually people understand now what it is, and they certainly understand the why. I think the question that people have, presumably for you inside government and out, is what's the government's theory of the case of how do you do it? What's the way that you'll do it differently this time that will really make it, that will work?
Yeah, no, thanks, James, and good to see everybody. Sorry to have been slightly late in joining myself. So I would say that Levelling Up is it is a really broad program for the government, and actually it probably goes across the 6 themes that Tony mentioned that CBI is using to focus its strategy. Link to link it up with some of the things that have already been said. I think one really fundamental thing to our approach is that join up with private enterprise and with business. And I think when you really kind of focus in on that, one thing that we struggle to do in parts of the country is, well, let me put it this way. So our cities underperform compared to many European cities. Our cities should have higher productivity and higher business growth, given their size, and they underperform compared to some of their European peers. And it's really worth sort of, dwelling on why is that the case and what we're trying to do about it. I mean, one of the things is, and this goes to the case for public intervention, is that some of our transport systems across the large cities are just not as good as they need to be to support a broad and deep labour market. One of the things that makes London such a successful place to have a business is your labour market is extremely broad, because the intra-city transport network works pretty well. That isn't the case in all of our cities, and that's a big focus for us. And so, we're trying to strike intra-city transport deals with all of the big cities to improve that. But you can't look at any of those things in isolation. I think improving education and skills in kind of all across the country is going to be really important as well. And that's a big focus of the skills strategy, thinking not just about young people, but thinking about adults as well. And the government's really kind of pushing forward on that over this period. I think the third thing I just wanted to kind of say up front is a lot of this for me also comes down to kind of the availability of good development opportunities for businesses. We know that, especially in our high streets and town centres, it's a really difficult time for lots of high streets and town centres. We need some really significant regeneration there. And there is a strong case for public intervention there, and there is a lot of money that we're looking to invest in association with private investors in those places. And this is also where places like Freeport's come into play, where there are opportunities for clustering to take place. You've got parcels of land that allow different businesses to sit side by side and really find synergies between them, and especially trading businesses. And again, that's why we're so focused on creating a set of tax benefits, customs benefits, but also recognizing that there might need to be some public investment to allow those clusters in the ports to develop. So those are just some examples, I think, of the approach that we're trying to take, recognizing the importance of what are all the factors that it's going to take to bring a business to a place and support its growth.
Can we dig into just a couple of those things? Can I take your second point first, if I might, which is about education, partly because Lucy's here from Northumbria University, partly because Greg Kirkman in the chat has made the point about further education. And actually, if you go back to the CBI's annual conference, one of the things that almost every business leader was making this point about skills. And once you go beyond the skills point, you get into the question around vocational education alongside university education. And when you do that, what you hear again and again is the sort of real anxiety within the FE sector about a decade of, in effect, cuts, real-term cuts. And I just wonder how you think the government addresses that, because it's such a scale of investment that's now needed if it's going to be true to its word of making that investment in skills that's needed presumably for the next decade.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this links to the point that Tony was making and the kind of what lots of people are observing about the labour market at the moment, and that the labour market is getting quite tight. The way through that is going to come from focusing not just on young people who are, coming towards the end of their education, but also on people who are already in the workforce, and helping them to have the skills for the jobs that are available now. I think we have, as a government, begun to announce new investment in FE, but also crucially create more flexibility around what adults can be funded to do in further education. I think that's really important as well. I think we've taken to heart the critique that lots of people have had that it's been really difficult actually for adults to retrain, and we're looking to ease that. But again, that won't be possible without lots of collaboration from private enterprise and from business. And I imagine lots of the businesses that are part of the CBI are already talking to their local FE college and having just that conversation about, what are our needs? Where do we need to be in 2-3 years' time? And I think that's exactly the kind of conversation that I think I would really, really encourage. And it's a conversation that needs to have a relatively kind of at least medium term, if not long term perspective. Because it's not just a question of kind of switching on the taps. It does take some time to plan a pipeline like that. I think lots of businesses actually are in a position where they can identify what they need, and can have that sophisticated conversation with their local college and local university. And I think this is really the moment to have that, because I think colleges are now in a better place to have that conversation than perhaps they were in the recent past.
Lucy, do you want to talk about that from Northumbria?
I'd love to come back on that. I think the key word that Emran has used there is this business of collaboration. I have never signed up to it's either higher education or it's further education. Businesses don't work that way. It's not a pick and mix either. They're wanting to choose the best from the universities, the graduate support, But I always go back to the example, we don't just educate 18 to 21-year-olds. We develop workforces in conjunction with partnerships. And we do that with FE colleges as well. So the FE colleges and the universities that will thrive in the future are those who have these key skills of partnership, collaboration, and so on, who see the opportunities of working with the businesses together to mold the skills for the workforce now and for the future by understanding the business needs, shaping the curriculum, shaping the technical training together. So some of the businesses I see really thriving in the Northeast are ones who think, right, our graduate level skills are this, we'll go to a university for those. The technical skills, we've got some good UTCs in the region, we'll go to a UTC or we'll go to an FE, but we'll mold it and we'll do it as a partnership piece together. And those people who have, and those organizations who have those skills, for me, are the ones that will really thrive in the future. And it gets back to Tony's point about building your expertise around the sectors.
Can I put a question to you, Emran, and I don't know, and Tony too, I guess, which is around devolution itself, because I think that prior to COVID, devolution attracted some interest in the business community, but the truth is it was a sort of public policy wonk issue, really, much more than a how do we, rather than a growth driver. And Jonathan Dunn, at least that was the way it was perceived, I should say. Jonathan Dunn puts this, really pretty succinctly. He says the UK is the most politically centralized country, or one of the most politically centralized country in which we operate as a business. However, I've not seen any reference for more devolution, including fiscal policy in levelling up. Is that right? And I don't know, Emran, whether you want to have a crack at that first, how devolution fits into the levelling up agenda, and then I'm going to come to you on it, Tony.
So I think the experience of almost all countries that have made progress in levelling up, that have tried to create more equality between the different regions of their countries, is I think the experience of almost every country is that that's been accompanied by the devolution or the decentralization of decision making. And we've done that too, and certainly the big city regions in England with with mayoral devolution. And ultimately, for me, it comes down to sort of, in a way, not really a policy question, but really practical question. We already have mayors who, for example, one of the things we've been doing with them over the last year is that we've given mayors money to develop brownfield sites in city centres. Because we know that there are lots of such sites that exist. They're often easier in planning terms and in terms of kind of consent from the local community than opening up a greenfield site. And rather than us kind of sitting here in central government deciding what gets developed and what doesn't get developed and being the ones to kind of broker that conversation, we've kind of devolved the money to the mayors to do it. And it just means that, practically speaking, they're in a much better place to know what the development landscape is in the city. They're in a much better place to kind of be able to join up between different partners. And because they're also thinking about, for example, transport at the same time, they're able to think about, okay, well, if we develop this site, this is what its transport needs will be, and they can bring those two things together. And so for me, in the end, it very quickly stops being a policy question and just turns into a really practical question about, do you have the levers to make change happen? And I think we've made some progress on that journey. I think what the mayors tell us is they'd like to see some more progress on that journey.
Tony, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, no, I think it is a policy question. I think it's a mega policy question. I understand Emran's point about the practicalities, but look, when I talk to mayors and local business people, business leaders in regions, what they really want to have is they really want to be able to do some long-term decentralized economic growth planning and to be able to use the government funds that come centrally with much more flexibility over a much longer period of time. And we were probably headed that way before COVID struck, and there was, for understandable reasons, pretty much two things happened. One is a reversion to centralization for reasons we understand. Secondly, we stopped doing longer term spending reviews. So something like the Shared Prosperity Fund, which people had talked about being a 7-year window of devolved funding to regions. What the mayors and the local business people want to do is they want to develop a strategy for Newcastle in the northeast, or they want to develop a strategy for Manchester in the northwest, and they want to be able to, rather than apply every year against grants that are available if you fulfill certain criteria to meet certain centralized policy objectives, they want to have the autonomy and the length of funding clarity to be able to say, do you know what, the northeast is going to be big on renewables, we've got a plan, give us funding, don't ask us to apply every year for a new pot because we can't mobilize local business around this. And so I think that is a pretty meta policy question. I actually think it's a pretty existential question about UK localism in general. Yeah. And I think we're, you know, people might say the CBI would probably be on the side of the center. We're not. I think we believe you'll only get levelling up in the long run if you've got that local partnership of government and business and universities. And that only really comes if you've got some certainty about, right, we've got a few years worth of funding and we've got quite a lot of autonomy about the bets we want to make. And so I think, you know, and Emran's job is unbelievably hard because he sits right at the heart of not only the policy and the practical, but probably that existential choice that Britain is just only inching towards, which says, do you know what, let's set a region free to devise its own strategy, its own international competitiveness. And sure, we'll hold them accountable for the way they spend money, but we won't have stated competitions for funds on bits and pieces. We'll genuinely back their plan. And it's not Emran's fault if that's not happening. That's really hard.
So, Tony, just to challenge that a bit, I mean, over the same period that you're talking about, we've reached a devolution deal with Leeds and West Yorkshire, which does give them a 25-year funding window for money that is theirs to commit. And all we're going to do is to review how it's going after every 5 years, because it's important to provide that accountability for the public money. But they've got a 25-year investment window ahead of them. The Towns Fund, which I'm responsible for, we're asking places to come to us to agree investment plans that span the next 3 or 4 years. And again, once we've agreed the investment plan, you know, we'll want to monitor it again to make sure we're delivering the outcomes that were expected. But we're not funding a place kind of, you know, for 6 months or for a year. We're funding them to execute their full investment plan. So I totally get it that, you know, people will want more of that. But, you know, we're definitely in the market for that. We've been doing it. I think where it's successful, that's what helps us then to build the case for doing more of it.
Can I come in here? I mean, I'm also going to say a word of defence for Emran. One of the challenges we have in the northeast in my patch, so I have a very small mayoral authority to work with, a small devolution deal, two combined authorities. We're probably in the situation we are in the northeast because it's our own making, and because back in the past there wasn't the political will to pull together, and that was then and this is now. And I think that we have really learnt and seen the opportunities of bigger devolution deals in other regions, seen the loud voice of mayors with a clear strategy and so on. Not that our mayor doesn't have a strategy, but he has very limited powers because it's such a small deal. And the consistent voice of the business community in my patch and my LEP area, CBI have been consistent about this, the chamber, is that we have to pull together to get the bigger devolution deal. And we need to come together ourselves in the northeast to articulate that really well. I think we're edging closer and closer. And I hope that, you know, soon we'll be able to say something positive. But it does take political will regionally, and we're seeing a shift. So I can't blame government, national government, for everything. And I'm not in a blame game. You make the decisions on the evidence and the opportunities as you perceive them at the time. But several years on, I think we're in a much more cohesive place in the northeast to see a bigger, stronger devolution package.
And Emran, the one thing that's interesting here is that actually I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know about the Leeds and West Yorkshire deal. I mean, as you're talking, I just sort of checked it out online, and you think to yourself, oh, that's quite interesting. And then your immediate, and this comes under the heading of no good deed goes unpunished, your immediate question then is, okay, well, why does it not happen in every other place? What's the system for how that works? So it's a very interesting thing, that mix between the practical and the policy, I think on devolution. Can I get into a couple of things that people in the course of the conversation have just posted in the chat, just because they're fantastically detailed, and also they get to sort of arm wrestling around levelling up and regionalism. One is for you, Emran, which is the point that there's been quite a lot of concern in Wales. You've heard it voiced in the Senate about the extent to which the levelling up fund actually is itself quite centralised, and I just wondered whether or not you've got a view on that and how the government addresses it.
Yeah, so look, I can see where the critique comes from, but to kind of to present our perspective on it, the government perspective on it, what we're trying to do is with the Levelling Up Fund work on the same basis or a similar basis as we can across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. And what that means in practice is working directly with the local authorities. And so what we're looking to do in Wales is work directly with the 22 or 23 local authorities in Wales. So they're the ones who are putting projects forward to us. The projects that we're able to invest in, we will then work with them to support them on delivering those projects. They'll fundamentally be in charge of delivering them with some support from us. And so it's about kind of subsidiarity in a way. It's about kind of working with the most local actor who we think can deliver that project, but also kind of use it to join up other things at the local level.
And sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but I think part of the argument there, and maybe this is comparing apples and oranges, but part of the argument there is that the levelling up funds are not sufficient to replace the loss of the EU funds that Wales previously benefited from.
So because as a function of the withdrawal agreement, we're still part of the EU structural funds in this cycle. Actually, they continue until 2023. And so the Levelling Up Fund for the next couple of years at least is kind of additional to what the European structural funds are already doing. And then the question for the future is, I think Tony referred to it, is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which becomes our sort of domestic replacement, if you like, for the European structural funds. And we're doing lots of work on that at the moment, beginning to have conversations with people around the country. And I expect we'll be able to say a lot more about that come the spending review.
Okay, Emran, thank you. Lucy, this is one for you, and you'll hear in my reading of it that I'm singularly unqualified to get involved in this discussion as I'm a Londoner. But there's a point from Robin Ashby who says, like Lucy, I had a small part in attracting Nissan to the Northeast, actually Teesside. Each local authority was pitching for itself and didn't get around to Sunderland, who eventually succeeded. But despite what she says, because this is a question about factionalism, despite what she says, we still have factions today. Witness north of Tyne combined authority, because south of the Tyne local authorities don't want to play. What can pan-regional organisations like the CBI do, and I suppose like the North East LEP do, to push local authorities, all controlled by the same political party, to put aside their parochialism for the greater good? The employees of Nissan come from all across the region via the arterial A19, and there are no boundary markers on the road. Over to you, Lucy.
In answer to that, good morning, Robin. Robin is absolutely right. One of my concerns about the Levelling Up funds is that we've got to work really hard to make sure that we don't go back into these smaller patches competing. And I think that is going to be down to political leadership and a very strong business voice saying, up with this, we will not put. And we have to make sure that that sort of behaviour, we cannot go back to that because it is detrimental to business. Robin's right, the supply chain for Nissan and in other areas sweeps across the Northeast and Tees Valley, and we have to build on that. So my plea is always that the wider geography, the bigger geography that the LEP has been able to manage, and my LEP area is massive, and it includes towns, coastal communities, huge rural environment up in Northumberland, Durham, well, all of the patch really, balancing that. But we're able to understand the data that we get from the businesses, understand the trends, and how you do it is down to political and business leadership to stop us reverting back to what Robin, I think, did he call it parochialism? It's certainly the word in my head. He's right, we've got to stop that, and it's down to strong leadership.
Tony, do you want to come in that? Partly was a question for the
Look,
CBI.
I think a lot of this discussion is about us getting up the maturity curve of decentralizing Britain, right? Which has not been our instinct. And you know, Emran has got examples there of how the department, I think, are making some really big bets. But as you say, you know, you can find them in some places, not everywhere, and that's because we're just now starting on the journey. This question about sort of factionalism across places, I think, is another one about sort of, you know, maturity, and it requires collaboration. And I think it's really important for us at the CBI and businesses. You know, we've got the whole Northeast region that spans, but we've also got Yorkshire and Humberside, which is a different region. You know, our pledge is that we will do our bit to think pan-regionally, you know, pan-boundaries in the interests of where there are natural business opportunities, natural economic opportunities. I think the government has to do that as well. Actually, ironically, if there's a role for central government in a more decentralized world, it's to make sure that this factionalism doesn't triumph. We need to make sure that politicians who might be seat targeting over the course of the next few years don't get sucked into that. And in fact, central government plays a really strong role in saying, look, the Northeast renewable sector spans many different parts of the country, different local authorities. It's a big project comprising these people, and it sort of demands and then fosters any local factionalism, gets it out of the way. But hopefully, as we get up that maturity curve, not only will our sort of city deals and devolution deals get stronger and bigger and longer, but actually, just as Lucy described, people will just get good at putting that stuff aside, because if they don't, they'll be punished.
Can I come back with an example of?
Sorry, there's just one final question, just because we've got a couple of minutes left. I just want to put one question to you, Emran, and one to you, Lucy, before we finish up. One is, one person's written with this question about, in effect, a reinventing the wheel question, which is, what do you do about things like the catapult network when there are already mechanisms in place to try and help on this agenda? How do those two things work? How does the levelling up work with things like catapult?
Yeah, no, the catapult network, as the caller has observed, I think is a really helpful tool actually here, and it is spread across the country. We're doing some work kind of across government at the moment on just how we bring together the story around what we're investing in innovation and how we're helping innovation kind of into the market. I think kind of my observation on that work would be, I think too often we only take a sectoral lens on that, and we don't take enough of a place-based lens on it. And I think we're quite keen, the conversation we're developing in government and with some partners, including Innovation UK, is turning that into a bit more of a place-based conversation as well. Okay. You know, so for example, across the, it's perhaps not a levelling up area as such, but the Oxford to Cambridge arc, we've got this, you know, such a powerful region in terms of lots of high growth businesses, but actually what you too often end up having is pockets of excellence in different parts of the arc which aren't connected to each other, and really thinking about that as a kind of one place, and how you drive those connections between businesses, between the people, between the labour markets. I feel there's going to be real power in that.
Emran, thank you. Lucy, will you in less than 1 minute answer a colossal question, which is how you think the pandemic and new patterns of working will change the way in which you think and approach this issue? I
keep going back to the same word of collaboration and the word partnership, and I think it has made us work in a really agile, quick, responsive way. So we've learned to pull together for a COVID recovery plan that involved local authorities, the mayor, businesses, CBI, absolutely key, the LEP holding the pen. We've learned to work in a different way. We've built up trust. We've learned to understand the real opportunities in our region, but we've also learned that we must talk to other regions as well. The example I was going to give very quickly is one of mine energy, all this heat bubbling underneath the old coal fields. That's not just a Northeast story, that's a Midlands story. It's probably a Welsh story as well. There are pockets there when the energy issue, green energy, this real drive from government that's to be welcomed. Here are opportunities when we have to work cross borders. So I think it's about trust, it's about seeking opportunities, and it's about collaboration.
Lucy, thank you, and Emran, thank you too. Tony, I'm going to give you the last word. Just do you want to pick up on that final point about the way in which you think that our approach to work and our expectations of business post-pandemic will have an impact on the levelling up agenda?
Yeah, look, the truth is we have no idea. You know, when we looked at this in the seize the moment analysis, it was definitely true that Britain lent itself better to working from home opportunities than other markets, mainly because we're such a strong services economy. So that gives us hope. But I think, you know, it's a bit like this right to flexible work from home debate at the moment, which I think is a non-starter. The truth is, this is an incredible dislocation we've just gone through. The businesses I speak to are in radically different places about work from home strategies.
Yeah.
People are in completely different places about whether or not you can do your same job from 300 miles away or not. And I think that's okay. I think we're going to have a bit of a shakeout in the next 6 months. We're going to learn some new patterns and some new opportunities. And so I wouldn't rush to make policy on that basis yet. But I certainly think, look, what we do know is, and London will know this, there's a lot of people have moved out of London because the cost of living is too high, and they will want to find ways to be able to have, you know, very, very strong professional opportunities from wherever they live in the country. That is already starting to happen. And I think we're just going to see how businesses respond to that in the next few months. And I would urge policymakers to hold off until we see exactly what's playing out.
Tony, thank you. Listen, in that spirit, by the way, our next CBI 10 on Wednesday is actually one of those subjects too, where you're thinking, what really is going on here? And we just don't know enough yet. So on Wednesday, we're going to look at unpacking those labour market shortages, exactly the points you made earlier on, Tony, about what's happening. Sorry, did I say Wednesday? That's Wednesday next week. So we'll got together on Monday. This is Wednesday next week. The CBI's got an issue about cash flow crunches, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, which I think is on this Thursday. So please do join for that. But for today, a big thank you to you, Lucy Winskell. Massive thank you to you, Emran Mian, for making the time. Tony, travel well to Teesside, and everyone have a very good day. Thanks so much.